Members of the Daughters of the American Revolution are fighting back against allowing transgender women into the historic, patriotic, nonprofit, non-political, volunteer women's organization.
Conservative commentator Michael Knowles agrees and wrote on X this week, quote, "Happily, members are channeling the rebellious spirit of their forebears and fighting back." Joining us now to discuss is host of the Michael Knowles Show, Michael Knowles. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you all. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's set up this story a little bit. My understanding is that the Daughters of the American Revolution have been sort of toying with the idea of allowing transgender participants for the past year or so. But you reported this week on a set of internal documents where they've basically just done this without the consent of their membership. Is that right?
Yes, and a lot of the members are rather miffed about this, and I think with good reason, because, well, it's right there in the name. The Daughters of the American Revolution is a group that is exclusively for women. There's another group called the Sons of the American Revolution, which I actually know something about because my grandpa was the president of his chapter of SAR. My father joined. Whenever I finish the paperwork, I can join the Sons of the American Revolution. So there's a place for men who want to join this genealogical group. But then, of course, it's a genealogical group, so the organization is grounded in genetics, making it all the more ironic that the leadership of D.A.R. now wants to ignore genetics and biology in the bylaws and in the membership. So there are a number of members who reached out and asked for help because they feel that this is being railroaded by a distant and oppressive leadership. So the ladies in the club, the women of the DAR, are channeling the rebellious spirit of their ancestors and fighting back. And I hope as this story has become more widely known, I think the leadership is going to be forced to back down because I think their position is just absurd.
Who pushed the leadership to make this choice? Is there pressure from outside woke actors, DEI considerations, those kinds of things?
There is pressure from individuals who are activists. In fact, there's a woman I interviewed on my own YouTube channel who describes herself as a trans widow. She's a woman whose husband came to identify as a woman and blew up the whole family. And she pointed out that her husband has actually joined DAR. So there are a lot of activists pushing it, and I think the leadership has feared the woke mob. So they've cited anti-discrimination law, which now has been redefined in recent years thanks to liberal justices on the court, plus Justice Gorsuch, to include gender identity. Now, of course, DAR is a private membership organization. However, I think they're just a little bit nervous of wokeness and of being canceled. And also, there's something actually rather charming about some of these women being a little bit traditional and demure and not wanting an aggressive political fight, though the members are pushing back. And I think it's all the more reason that men in this case need to stand up and say, no, women are entitled to their own spaces. They're entitled to their own private clubs. They're entitled to their own sports teams. They're entitled to their own locker rooms and bathrooms. And perverse men who have a radical agenda have no right to invade those spaces.
Well, I don't speak on behalf of all women, and I'm sure you don't speak on behalf of all women either, but I do find it interesting that men are the ones that need to speak up about this and not women. I mean, the membership of the Daughters of American Revolution are not all traditional. Carol Burnett, Bo Derek, who's a socialist and supported Bernie Sanders, Senator Tammy Duckworth, Rosalind Carter, the late Rosalind Carter, all members.
The people who tend to go to these groups tend to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditional. I don't know, there's no poll of what percentage of the members support this or oppose this, and I guess that's really the problem. That's what the DAR members are complaining about, that this has been railroaded through, criticism has been suppressed, and the members have been instructed not even to speak to the media about it. So something tells me if the pro-trans side really had the majority of members, they wouldn't need to ram this policy through over the objections of so many.
And I'm quite troubled, Michael, by the leadership's assertion that this could be something to do with legal discrimination suits or things like that, because as you mentioned, this is a private organization, and hasn't the Supreme Court already upheld the rights of private organizations to be sex-segregated spaces?
Sure. The problem, though, is that as our law develops, freedom of association, which was so important to the American founding and the Constitution, has slowly been eroded. So you've seen cases of men trying to join sororities, you've seen all sorts of lawsuits, and you've seen our jurisprudence weaken on these points. The Bostock decision, I think, is a pretty clear example of that. So, as of now, yes, the sororities are still able to be women's-only spaces. The D.A.R., for that matter, right now is still allowed to be a women's-only space. But we don't know how long that will continue. I think that the left-wing activists here recognize that there are powerful political forces at their backs, and so they're just trying to push the envelope even further.
Certainly if they were using, if it was legal mechanisms of Title IX redefinitions or Title whatever to force this change on a private organization, then I would certainly oppose that. It wouldn't surprise me if it one day comes to that. A private organization can, as you acknowledge, choose their own member. I support that, right? If they wanted to include trans people, they could. It's not anybody's business necessarily, but we're allowed to complain about it and not feel that this is a positive development for the organization. You're certainly allowed to feel that way about it.
I feel it is a little bit my business. And I feel it's my business because we live in society, and this is not just any organization. It's a civic organization, and it's one that is tied to American history and to the American tradition. And because, I'm a citizen who speaks the English language, and if we're going to redefine the word daughter, that actually does affect me. So what's so wrong about this at a really deep level, beyond questions of consent and the rights of nonprofit organizations to change their bylaws or whatever, what's really fundamentally wrong is that men can't be daughters. Men are sons and women are daughters. And so if the DAR were to expand its membership to include men, then it wouldn't really be more inclusive. It wouldn't be broader than it currently is. It would just cease to exist. There would no longer be any such thing as the Daughters of the American Revolution. There would just be some new group, I guess. It's sort of like the Boy Scouts. When the Boy Scouts expand to include girls, they don't really expand. There just isn't any Boy Scouts anymore. And so I think the DAR is a great organization. I'm not saying this is the most important political group in America or anything like that, but it's a good organization that preserves some of our heritage and patriotic memory, and that's a good thing for the country, and I would hate to see it destroyed. And I would especially hate to see it destroyed by some activists in the street or by some leaders who have been kowtowed by the activists, especially if that's over the objection of so many of the members who are being silenced.
Well, it is interesting that you, a man, are taking this cause on behalf of all of the women members of DAR. But just like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, the DAR and the Sons of the American Revolution have different duties and different goals. And so maybe, that's another thing to look into is a few years ago, DAR didn't allow African-American women, even those who did have a legacy, genealogical legacy that went back to the Revolution. Again, I would be very curious to see how many people in the DAR oppose to this because it has a diverse membership. Carol Burnett, as I said, Bo Derek, Tammy Duckworth, Rosalind Carter, some of the more notable ones who have a very progressive perspective on a lot of these issues. But again, why isn't it the women inside that are talking about this? Why does it have to be you on the outside speaking on behalf of this large organization of women with a diverse set of ideas?
Because the leadership told them they can't speak to anyone about it.
So
that's
it's your
why
job
they reached
now?
out to me.
So it's your
It was
job.
multiple members who did it. You mentioned that a few years ago, the DAR didn't let black women in. It was more than a few years ago. The DAR has accepted black members for quite a long time, as America's relationship with race has developed. And even to mention certain high-profile left-wing celebrities who could be members of DAR, I do think it's a little misleading. You sometimes see this with another American genealogical society, the Mayflower Society. You notice I have Mayflower cigars here. That's a group that I'm a member of, too. And there are all sorts of people who can claim membership in the group, or perhaps whose families have been involved, but they are not actively involved. So, I think also people who can claim direct descent from the American Revolution patriots is a huge number of people. But those who are actively involved in preserving this legacy, it's a much smaller group of people. And I can speak with experience. These are groups that tend to be a little bit more conservative. And when we're talking about an issue like transgenderism, by the way, we're talking about an issue that was not really supported by anyone even 7 or 8 years ago. The very notion of transgenderism as a matter of public life really only reached the scene toward the middle and end of the Obama administration. If you asked a Democrat in 2011 what he thought of transgender rights, he would have looked at you like you had 3 heads, much less a Republican. Don't forget, in 2011, Barack Obama believed marriage was a sacred union between a man and a woman. So this is a radical social change that has received a ton of pushback. This issue is so lively with even ordinary American people, much less, conservatives of a certain age, that it flipped Virginia red. Glenn Youngkin won his election largely on that issue. Ron DeSantis won re-election largely on that issue. I don't think it's really all that controversial that women should be allowed to have their own clubs and men don't belong in there. It's controversial among the chattering class, among the political elite, but among ordinary Americans, and especially those interested in genetics, biology, history, and tradition. This is not a difficult issue.
And I would say, Michael, I appreciate you using your platform for this, because if we learned anything from the Riley Gaines case with Leah Thomas, the women who were on the swim team with Leah Thomas were told that if they didn't want to change in the locker room with him, that they were the ones that had to go somewhere else. He wasn't given a separate locker room. The women had to go somewhere else. And if they spoke out, they were at risk of losing their spot on the team or being referred to some kind of university organization that would tell them why they were being bigots. And so sometimes it does take people with a platform or people with a louder voice who are able to stand up for people who feel like they're not allowed to say anything, or if they do, they're going to face some kind of consequence that is higher than their ability to actually reach the public with the issues that they're facing.
I'm pleased to hear you say that, Amber, and I certainly would like to help in any way that I can. The Daughters of the American Revolution are tough gals, and they come from very strong stock, so, they're fighting a good fight. But I think it's important. If you believe that men and women really are different, then men ought to stand up for women. This also would not have been controversial more than just about 5 minutes ago, but it is important. And so it's not just that women, and this is obviously a much larger issue than the D.A.R. This involves sports, it involves schools, it involves bathrooms and locker rooms, all aspects of society. It really shouldn't just be up to the women to try to protect themselves against the predations of perverse men who are violating their spaces. Men need to stand up on this issue, and we need to speak the truth, and we speak the truth in love and in charity, but you got to speak the truth, and we ought to protect women. That was a traditional role for men, and we shouldn't abandon that, or frankly, we've adopted the transgender ideology ourselves.
Well, I can't wait for you to join the fight in supporting women's health across the country, since you want to stand for women and supporting our right to choose and are supporting our body autonomy.
I strongly support women's health, absolutely.
Michael Knowles, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.